Welcome back to On the Same Page. We are on Daf Chaf Vav Amud Aleph, 26a of Maseches Taanis. We are starting the fourth parak, the fourth chapter. We begin with the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Bishlosha prakim bashana kohanim nosing es kapein arba pa'amim bayom. There are 3 times a year that the Kohanim would do Nesias Kapayim, would raise their hands. In other words, they would do the Birkas Kohanim, the priestly blessing, 4 times in one day. Now, it doesn't actually mean that there were 3 times in the year where they did it 4 times in one day. What it really means is there were 3 times in the year where they did Birkas Kohanim at all of the tefillos during the day. See, normally, now it's different outside of Israel, but let's say in Israel, they do Birkas Kohanim every day at Shachris, and they would do it also at Musaf, if there's Musaf. They don't do it at Mincha. But our Mishnah is saying that there were 3 times a year where they would do it even at Mincha, and sometimes a 4th time if there was Ne'ilah, as we're about to see. So it says, right, they would do it 4 times b'yom in the day, b'shachris, in the morning, b'musaf, b'mincha, u'v'ne'ilah sh'arim, and at the locking of the gates. That either refers to the locking of the gates to the Beis HaMikdash, the time that they were closing up the Beis HaMikdash, the end of the day, or, like we're probably more familiar with as we think of it in terms of Yom Kippur, the time of the locking of the gates of heaven, where the gates are now closing. So it says there were 3 times a year. What were they? Elohein. What were they? It says they were B'tainios uv'ma'amados Yom HaKippurim. The 3 times were on fast days and on ma'amados, which we'll have to explain what that means. It comes from the word like standing, the ma'amados, and b'Yom HaKippurim, and on Yom Kippur. So those were the days, which is also a fast day, where they would say Birkas Kohanim at all the tefillos. And what all these days have in common is that they're all fasts. And really the issue of saying Birkas Kohanim at Mincha is we're afraid that the Kohanim by that time of day have already had a little bit to drink. But on a fast day that's not a concern. Therefore, according to this opinion at least, you are allowed to do Birkas Kohanim at Mincha. And so on fast days, on Ma'amados and on Yom Kippur, where nobody's drinking, then they would do Birkas Kohanim at all the tefillos in the day. Now, Elohein Ma'amados. What are the Ma'amados? What's the idea of this thing called Ma'amados? So it explains Lefi Shenamar, because the pasuk says with regards to the daily offering, the Karban Tamid, which is a Karban Sibur. It's a public Karban on behalf of everyone. It says Tzavis B'nei Yisrael, right? Command the Jewish people that they should bring us Karban Yilachmi, my Karban. So it's a Karban that represents all the Jewish people, and everybody contributed to it. Now, the Mishnah says, V'chiheich Karbano shel Adam Krab, V'hu eino omed al gabav. If this is the Karban of all the people, well, how could somebody have a Karban brought for them, and they're not standing over it, and observing it, and taking it in, and being a part of it? So, Hiskinu Nevi'im HaRishonim, so the early prophets, Rashi tells us it's Shmuel and David, that based on the later Gemara. Shmuel HaNavi and David HaMelech, they were Mesakin, they decreed that the following should be arranged. That Esrim Arba Mishmaros, I'll call Mishmar, Esrim Arba Mishmaros. First of all, there are 24 Mishmaros, 24 rotations of the Kohanim. I'll call Mishmar Hayam Maimad B'Yerushalayim. And for each mishmar, really from the word guard, each rotation, each guard of Kohanim that served in the Beis HaMikdash in 2 week, they each had 2 weeks of the year. I think they only did a week at a time, but they had 2 weeks of the year, totaling 48 weeks. Then they had to figure out what to do the rest of the other weeks. But there were 24 groups, and for each one there was a Maimad in Yerushalayim. What's the Maimad? It was Shel Kohanim, Shel Levim, V'Shel Yisrael. It was made up of some Kohanim, the Kohanim of the Mishmar, and the Levim of the Mishmar, and Yisraelim. There are also people who are not Kohans, they're not Levites, and they are Yisraels, and they would play a role in the Karban. And what would happen? So it says, Yigiya Zmana Mishmar La'alos, when the time of that Mishmar, that rotation, it came your time to go up to Yerushalayim to serve in the Beis HaMikdash. Kohanim u'Leviyim olim Yerushalayim. The Kohanim and the Leviyim would go up to Yerushalayim. The Yisrael Shebe'oso Mishmar, and the Yisraelim, who were part of that Mishmar, part of that rotation, Miskantzin le'arehen, they would gather in their cities, and they would do the following: V'korin b'maisa bereshis, and they would read the Torah each day from the creation of the world. And pause there for a second. So what we have is that, what's this idea of a maimad? The maimad basically refers to the Yisraelim who were assigned to be the watchmen of the Karban. So far the Mishnah talks about that there were groups of people in each city, or that were assigned to each Mishmar, who would stay in their cities, but they would gather and they would lane from the creation of the world, and we'll see what else they would do. But along with that, this which is not mentioned here in the Mishnah, there was also a group of the Maimad who was in Yerushalayim, Yisraelim, who would go and observe the Karban and daven over the Karban that it should be accepted, and that was the Maimad. So it seems there were two parts to the Maimad. There were the people in Yerushalayim who would go actually to the Beis HaMikdash, to where they were allowed to stand, Yisraelim, and they would daven, and then there was also people that would remain in their cities. Now what would these people do? We'll read these parentheses, I'm taking up, but we'll read it. They would fast, the men of the Maimad would fast for 4 days during the week. From Monday to Thursday, so Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 4 days. They wouldn't fast on Friday out of respect for the upcoming Shabbos, which they, I guess, would have to prepare for. And not on Sunday either. There's a concern that they'll go from a day of Shabbos, of menucha, of rest and oneg and enjoyment and pleasure, to go from that into a fast. So that would be like a shock and yamusu. So we don't paskin that way, I don't think. I think we do sometimes have fasts on Sundays, but like certainly with Tisha B'Av, when it gets pushed off to Sunday. So we don't seem to be concerned about this. But this opinion was concerned about having a fast on Sunday. To go from Shabbos right into a fast was considered dangerous. Now, what would they lane in these? What would they read? They would read from the creation of the world. So what would they read? Bayom Arishon, on the first day they would read Bereshis. They would read the first few psukim of Bereshis, and Yehi Rakia, and the verses of Yehi Rakia of the creation of the sky. Basheni, on the second day, they would reread Yehi Rakia, that there should be the creation of the firmament of the sky, and then they would read V'yikavu Hamayim. They would read how about how the water was gathered and there was dry land. B'shlishi, on the third day, on Tuesday, Yikavu Hamayim. They would reread Yikavu Hamayim, that the water should gather. V'yehi Ma'oros, and then they would read the creation of the luminaries, of the sun and the moon, the stars. B'Revi, on the fourth day, Yehi Ma'oros, they would reread, and this is Wednesday, they would reread the creation of the luminaries. The Yishurtzu Hamayim, and then they would read Yishurtzu Hamayim, the creation of fish, I believe. B'Chamishi, on the fifth day, on Thursday, Yishurtzu Hamayim, they would reread the creation of fish. But Totei Haaretz, and then they would also read Totei Haaretz. This is I'm not sure if this is I think this would be the creation of animals, I believe. Bashishi, and on the sixth day they would read Totei Haaretz ve'Yechul Hashamayim, and the creation of the heavens, Vaychul Hashamayim, that the completion, Vaychul Hashamayim Aretz, that everything was complete. That's what they would read on Friday, on the sixth day. Now, how would they divide it up? Because there were 3 aliyahs. So, like we have, typically on, let's say, a Monday on a weekday. So they would also have 3 aliyahs. Parsha Gedola Korin Osa Bishnayim, whichever of the two, right, each time they were reading two parshas, two paragraphs, whichever one was larger, they would divide into two aliyahs, making sure to have 3 psukim per olah, per person getting an aliyah, and then Vaktana biyachid, and the smaller one, whichever the two things was smaller, the two parshas was smaller, that would be read by the third person by an individual, by one person. And that's how you get 3 aliyahs, 2 and 1, or 1 and 2, depending on which parsha was bigger. B'shachris b'musaf. They would do this they would read from the Torah at shachris and at musaf. So already twice each day. U'v'mincha nichnasin v'karing apiyah and karing Shema. But at mincha they would go in and read it by heart. They wouldn't take out a Torah, and they would read it like a person who reads the Shema when you're fluent in it. That's how they would read these psukim. Erev Shabbos b'mincha, Friday at mincha. Lo hayu nichnasin. They wouldn't go to the shul to lane. Mipnei kavod Shabbos, because of honor of Shabbos, to prepare for Shabbos. Kol yom sheish bo halel, a day that has halel, a holiday. Ein bo maimud. The maimud was not operational. B'shachris, in the morning, because they were saying instead of doing extra things, they would just say Hallel. The Rashi understands that this refers specifically to the people in Yerushalayim who were there to daven over the Karban, that on a day where they were saying Hallel, they wouldn't daven over the Karban because they didn't have time, because they were busy reading Hallel, which maybe tells us something about how Hallel is supposed to be read. It's supposed to take time, but so they wouldn't daven over the Karban of the morning tamid, of the morning daily offering, because they were busy saying Hallel. Karban Musaf, on a day where there is Musaf, ein b'ne'ilah, they wouldn't daven over the Karban at Ne'ilah, and Rashi explains nor at Mincha, because they were so busy in preparing the Karban Musaf, so they didn't have time to daven over the later Karbanos of Mincha and Ne'ilah. And Rashi says that the reason is because Musaf, first of all, had more offerings than the daily Tamid, which was just 1, and Musaf had always at least 2. And not only that, but also the Yisraelim on the Maimad had other jobs in preparing, such as gathering wood and water, and they had other jobs, and therefore they weren't able to do the Maimad, to do the davening for at Ne'ilah time. So that is, and then Karban Eitzim, on a day where they would bring the Karban Eitzim, the wood offering, which we'll have to see what that is. Ein b'mincha, then they wouldn't do the special davening of the Maimad at mincha time. Divrei Rabbi Akiva, that's all the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Amar lo Ben Azai said to Rabbi Akiva, Kacha Rabbi Yeshua shoneh. Rabbi Yeshua taught the following, differently than what you just said. Karban Musaf, on a day where there's a Karban Musaf, ein b'mincha. Then there was no Maimad at mincha, but at Ne'ilah there would have been. So the first opinion, Rabbi Akiva had said that on a day where there's a Karban Musaf, there's no Ne'ilah, and certainly there's no mincha, because mincha is closer to Musaf. So that just canceled out the whole afternoon. There was no Maimad, they wouldn't do the special davening the rest of the day. But Ben Azai said no. They wouldn't do mincha, they wouldn't do the special Maimad at mincha, davening over the Karbanos then. However, they would still do it at Ne'ilah. And Karban Eitzim was the opposite. Karban Eitzim, on a day where they brought the wood, the offering for the wood, the special offering because of the wood, which we'll see what that is, ein b'ne'ilah. Then they wouldn't do a Maimad neither at Ne'ilah or at Mincha. Chazer Rabbi Akiva liyoshoneh k'ben Azai. And Rabbi Akiva eventually, when he heard this, he changed and started teaching like Ben Azai said, in the name of Rabbi Yeshua. again, the way that Rashi interpreted this whole little paragraph that we just read is that it's referring to the people in Yerushalayim and davening over the karbanos, and on days where either if they said Hallel, then they wouldn't do the Maimad over the karban at Shachris, and if it was a day where there was a karban musaf and they were extra busy, then they wouldn't say the Maimad over either Mincha or Mincha and Ne'ilah. This could be understood also to refer to the people outside of Yerushalayim, the people in the Maimad who were doing the special Torah reading of Parshas Bereshis at Shachris and Mincha and Musaf, and on days where it could be saying that if there was Musaf, then they were laying at Musaf, they wouldn't do it at Mincha. It's possibly another way to understand it. Okay. Continuing in the Mishnah. This Mishnah, again, is a long Mishnah. We're going to be going through the whole thing. Just like in the last two chapters, again, this is something that seems specific to Maseches Taanis, where the second, third, and fourth chapter all begin with just all the Mishnahs packed into one long Mishnah, and then all the Gemaras on that, which again, when we go through the Gemaras, we'll get a better understanding of these different parts of the Mishnah once we break it down. The Mishnah continues, and it says, Zman Atze Kohanim V'Ha'am Tisha. There were 9 times of the Atze Kohanim V'Ha'am. There were 9 times where there was this wood offering brought, because that's when wood was donated. So there was a special, they used a lot of wood on the Mizbeach, on the altar, and there were specific times that people brought wood, as we'll see, and they had a special offering that they would bring on that day. So there were 9 times in the year that were specific for bringing wood. Be'echad ben Nisan, b'nei Arach ben Yehuda. The first of Nisan, the family descending from Arach ben Yehuda would bring wood. And Rashi explains they were the first to, when the Jewish people came out of Galus, out of exile. I think after I guess right, we had to have been after the Babylonian Persian exile, when the second Beis HaMikdash was built. So they were the first to come and donate wood on the 1st of Nisan, and that became their day, special day of donating wood on the 1st of Nisan. Ve'esrim b'Tammuz, on the 20th of Tammuz, b'nei David ben Yehuda, the descendants of David ben Yehuda. Rashi says it's referring to David HaMelech. The descendants of David HaMelech, they were the ones who brought wood during the second Beis HaMikdash, on the 20th of Tammuz. B'chamisha b'Av, on the 5th of Av, b'nei Parish ben Yehuda, the descendants of Parish from Yehuda. B'Shiva bo, on the 7th, b'nei Yonadav ben Rechev, the descendants of Yonadav ben Rechev, on the 7th of Av. B'Asara bo, on the 10th of Av, b'nei Sana ben Binyamin, the descendants of Sana ben Binyamin. B'chamisha asar bo, on the 15th of Av, b'nei Zesu ben Yehuda, the descendants of Zesu ben Yehuda, v'yimayim Kohanim v'Levim v'chol mishata b'shivto. And among them were also Kohanim and Leviim, and anybody who didn't know what Shevet they were from. That was also their time to bring wood on the 15th of Av. Ubnei Gonvi Ali Ubnei Kotze Ketzios, as well as those who stole the ali. The ali, we'll see when we get to the Gemara, is like something that's used for crushing, I guess, grapes or olives, some kind of mortar or pestle or whichever one does the crushing. And B'nei Kotze Ketzios are those who cut the figs. So these were sort of nicknames for these families, and we'll see the story of why they got these nicknames. It was a good thing, they did something meritorious, and therefore they got these names, and they also would bring wood on that day. Be'esrim bo, on the 20th of Av, b'nei Pachas Moav ben Yehuda, the descendants of Pachas Moav from Yehuda. Be'esrim be'Elul, on the 20th of Elul, b'nei Adin ben Yehuda, the descendants of Adin ben Yehuda. Be'echad be'Teves Shibo, on the 1st of Teves, b'nei Parish Shniya, the descendants of Parish would come a second time. They already came on the 5th of Av. They would come again on the 1st of Teves. Be'echad b'teves, the Gemara, the Mishnah tells us in the first Teves, l'hayu bo maimad. They wouldn't have the maimad, the special davening, because the first of Teves is in the middle of Chanukah. So shahayu bo halel, v'karban musaf, v'karban eitzim. They had everything going. They had halel, they had musaf, they had karban eitzim. It was a very busy day. There was no time for the special ma'amados, the special davening of the maimad. Okay, now we shift gears. And now we talk about the fast days that we're more familiar with. There were 5 things that occurred to our ancestors on the 17th of Tammuz. And there were 5 things that happened on Tisha B'Av, on the 9th of Av. On the 17th of Tammuz, Nishtabru haluchos. The luchos were broken. When Moshe Rabbeinu came down and saw the golden calf, and he smashed the luchos, that was on the 17th of Tammuz, the first tragedy to occur on that day. Ubatal HaTamid, as well, it's the day where the Karban Tamid was stopped. Not clear if it refers to the first temple, the second temple. I think there's different opinions. But basically it was when they brought their last Karban Tamid, their last daily offering, was before their destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, was on the 17th of Tammuz. It doesn't say how many years before. Rashi says it was a gezerah. They were not allowed to. There's a decree by the Malchus. Often that refers to the Romans, so it would be the second Beis HaMikdash. There was a decree, you can't bring the Karban Tamid. It could be the Beis HaMikdash stood a few more years after that, or many years, I don't know the history, but it was on the 17th of Tammuz that there was no longer a Karban Tamid brought. Bisaraf apustamos es hatara, vehem itzalim behechal. There was a Roman named Apustamos, and he, first of all, he did 2 things. One thing he did was he burned a Sefer Torah, and the second thing he did was he put a tzalim, an idol, in the heichal, in the Beis HaMikdash, and those were the last 2 things that happened on the 17th of Tammuz. So the luchos were broken, the Tamid was stopped. Oh, I skipped a very important one. Behuvka ha'ir. The city was breached. So, again, it's not clear from the Mishnah if this refers to the first or the second Beis HaMikdash, but I think this was the second Beis HaMikdash. The first Beis HaMikdash, we have a explicit verse that says it happened on the 9th of Tammuz. But the second Beis HaMikdash was broken open. The walls of Yerushalayim were breached on the 17th of Tammuz. And the last things were right. The Apostamos, he burned the Torah, and he also set up an idol in the Beis HaMikdash. B'Tisha B'Av, what were the 5 things that happened on the 9th of Av? So first of all, Nigzar al Avoseinu shel Konsularis. The first thing was that after the Chet HaMeraglim, the sin of the spies in the desert, it was on the 9th of Av that Hashem said that you will not enter the land of Israel and you'll have to wander in the desert until all the men who are between 20 and 60 die out. You'll wander for another 38 years, 40 years altogether. They weren't allowed to enter the land of Israel. V'charav habayis barishona v'shniya. And the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. Both the first and the second were destroyed, at least in part, on Tisha B'Av. V'nilkada Beitar. And Beitar was conquered. The city of Beitar, which was a great city in the time post Beis HaMikdash, in the time of Bar Kokhba, who really led a rebellion against the Romans, but it was quashed on, and really the hopes of the Jewish people were quashed on the 9th of Av. V'nechresha ha'ir, as well. This was a day where the Gentiles plowed over the city of Yerushalayim. They destroyed, I guess, remnants of the beauty of the Beis HaMikdash. So those are the 5 things on Tisha B'Av. Again, it was the decree that we would wander in the desert and not enter Eretz Yisrael. The destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash, the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, the destruction of Beitar, and the plowing over of Yerushalayim. Mishanichnas Av ematim b'simcha. As a result, since Av is such a terrible time, when we enter the month of Av, we are instructed to be memayit, to lessen our joy. Shabbos shechal Tisha B'Av lios b'socha, the week that Tisha B'Av falls out. Asur milasaper milchabis. It's forbidden for one to shave or get a haircut, literally to get a haircut, umilchabis, and to do laundry, to wash their clothes. It's a time of mourning. Uvechamishi, and on Thursday, mutarin, then it's permitted to take kavod Shabbos out of the honor of Shabbos. The Mishnah says, at least the Rashi says it's referring to washing one's clothes. If Tisha B'Av falls out on Friday, one is allowed to wash their clothes on Thursday in honor of Shabbos, which they won't have time to prepare for. Shabbos will be after Tisha B'Av, but you couldn't do, I guess we don't want you doing the preparations on Tisha B'Av itself, so you'd be allowed to do the preparations for Shabbos on Thursday. Erev Tisha B'Av, on the eve of Tisha B'Av, lo yochal adam shnei tavshilin. A person shouldn't eat two cooked foods. Rashi says, like, you shouldn't eat meat and fish together. I think the Mefarshim say he has to be talking about a type of meat that will be allowed to be eaten with fish, because we don't eat meat with fish, or meat and eggs. You shouldn't eat two cooked foods together. Again, this, it sounds like it's the whole day. The way that we practically, the way we rule in halacha is it means the last meal, what we call the Suda Mafsekis, the last meal before Tisha B'Av shouldn't have two cooked foods. The custom is just to eat like an egg. Go yocha basar, a person shouldn't eat meat. V'lo yishta yayin, a person shouldn't drink wine. And not clear from the Mishnah, but it seems to apply for the whole week leading up to Tisha B'Av. And really we extend it 9 days, practically from the beginning of Av, but strictly according to the Mishnah, it would seem it's just the week of Tisha B'Av. Rav Shimon Gamliel Omer, Yishana. Rav Shimon Gamliel says, no, you don't have to, it's not that you can't have any of this stuff, Yishana. You have to do different than what you would normally do. You have to lessen it, but you don't have to stop completely. Rabbi Yehuda Mechayev B'Kviyas Hamita. Rabbi Yehuda requires, at least on Tisha B'Av, that you flip over your bed and sleep on the floor. The Chacham didn't agree to that. Amar Rav Shimon Gamliel. Rav Shimon Gamliel says, so now we're on to a new topic. So that's Tisha B'Av. Now let's move to the 15th of Av, what we call Tu B'Av. Amar Rav Shimon Gamliel, Lo hayu yom tovim liYisrael ki chamisha asar b'Av v'kiyom HaKippurim. There's no Yantif in Israel like the 15th of Av and like Yom Kippur. The greatest Yomim Tovim of the year, the greatest holidays of the year, says the Mishnah, are the 15th of Av, Tu B'Av, and Yom Kippur. And what would happen on these days? Shebahen benos Yerushalayim yotzos b'klei lavan. The daughters of Yerushalayim, the girls, would go out wearing white clothes, she'ulin, borrowed white clothes, so that everybody, there was no class distinction here, and everybody, if you didn't have, you could borrow. To not embarrass someone who didn't have. Everybody borrowed from other people, and even the rich people would borrow from other people, and this way everybody was on this in the same class. And the Mishnah mentions kolakelim tun and tefillin. They would, before they would wear the clothes, they would be tovel them. They would immerse the clothes in the mikvah in case they were tameh, because you didn't know who you were, whether the girl that you were borrowing from was tameh, was perhaps ritually impure. Ubenos Yerushalayim yotzos, and the daughters of Yerushalayim would go out v'cholos b'kramim, and they would dance in the vineyards. Umahayu omros, and what would they say? They would say, Bachur, young man, Sana inecha, raise up your eyes to re'ei mata baralcha, and take your choice. This was how they did shidduchim. They said, we're dancing, take your choice, but al titing einecha b'nai, don't cast your eyes on beauty, ting einecha b'mishpacha, look into the family. What it means is the righteousness of the person. As we say, it quotes the pasuk in Mishlei from Eishes Chayil, sheker hachein, grace is sheker, is falsehood. Vehevel hayofi, and beauty is futile. Isha yiras Hashem hitis halal. a woman who has Yiras Hashem, who has fear of heaven, fear of God, she is one who is praiseworthy. That's who you should choose. The Omer, and it says, T'nula mipri yadeha, give her from the fruits of her hand, Bihalua b'sha'arim asem, praise her for her deeds in the gates. Praise her within the gates for her deeds, that's what counts. What counts is her deeds. And so they would go out on these days and say this. We'll see at the end of the Masechta, a brisa that elaborates further on what they would say. And we'll also see why Tu B'Av was such a celebration. That's something that the Gemara is going to ask. V'cheinu Omer, and it also says, the pasuk says in Shir Hashirim, and this seems to be an indication of why Yom Kippur, where we see Yom Kippur is such a holiday, it says Tze'ena Re'ena, or also why the girls go out on Yom Kippur. It says Tze'ena Re'ena B'nos Tzion, go out and see daughters of Zion, B'melech Shlomo, the king Shlomo, but here it means the king of peace. Rashi says it refers to Hashem, who's the king whose peace belongs to him. Ba'atara sha'atra lo imo, the crown that his mother has prepared for him. And here the mother refers to Klal Yisrael, the crown that Klal Yisrael prepares for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. B'yom chasunaso u'v'yom simchaso, on the day of his chasuna and on the day of his simcha, on the day of his wedding and on the day of his joy. B'yom simchas libo, on the day of the joy of his heart. What does that refer to? B'yom chasunaso, the day of his wedding. Zeh matan Torah. That refers to the day of the giving of the Torah. But we don't mean Shavuos, we mean Yom Kippur, the day that Moshe Rabbeinu brought down the second set of Luchos, which was on Yom Kippur. That's the day of the chasuna, of the wedding of the Jewish people and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Uviyom simchas libo, and the day of the celebration of his heart, Zeh binyan Beis HaMikdash, that refers to the building of the Beis HaMikdash, Sheibane b'mheira v'yameinu, that it should be built speedily in our days. So we see from this pasuk, I guess, that there seems to be a reference to the girls going out on Yom Kippur, on B'yom Chasunas, on the day of his Chasunat, Ena Re'ena, go out and see Benos Tzion. And we also see that Yom Kippur is this day of great joy, and it's referred to as Yom Chasunas, so it's the day of the wedding of the Jewish people with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with God, in that was the day that Moshe Rabbeinu resealed the covenant between us and God by returning and bringing the second set of the Luchos to us. We'll hold here, we'll begin the Gemara next time.